Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. David Rosensweet, and this is a special day for me. My goodness, we have a special guest, Dr. Devaki Berkson. My goodness, we met in the 80s, didn't we? In Santa Fe, it wasn't in the 1980s, Devaki?
Right,
And
right.
I always have admired your work in hormones and so much, and it's a privilege to have you here today. So hello
Well,
to you.
thank you for saying that. You're one of my heroes too, David. You always seem to, no matter how much conflict or angst is revolving around the planet, you take out the good bits and you could put a positive spin on it, which takes a lot of soul elbow grease. So thank you for what you do.
Yes. And gee, I think it would be cool if we just launched into it because I've only thought of about 3,000 different directions we could go in here. But I have some special topics I wanted to talk to you about. But I'd like to just see, do you have, of those topics we mentioned, or anything that comes to your mind? Is there anything that comes to your mind right away, or should I just launch into bringing up the topics?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is that over the last few years, hormone therapies have been vindicated. A 19-year reanalysis presented by 13 very prestigious cancer centers at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, December 19th, 2019, they reanalyzed the Women's Health Initiative and they said, we have made a terrible mistake. Estrogen therapies in healthy women prevent and inhibit the incidence of breast cancer. And yet, we are trying to educate women about how hormones are some of the most powerful anti-aging tools we have. Now we know they protect against breast cancer if prescribed in the right way. But when women go to their gynecologists, and I hear this all the time, they often hear, you don't need hormones. I don't believe in hormones. Hormones cause cancer. And these are the people that society says should be assessing our hormones and writing scripts for us for our hormones. And women go to talk with them and they're not up on the data. So I find that very frustrating. I'm fortunate I can get my own hormone prescriptions, but what about women who can't get access to them? I think this is an important discussion.
What a wonderful thing to lead off with, because remains this humongous elephant in the room. And, prior to 2002 in that original Women's Health Initiative, 40% of American women were on hormone replenishment therapy, mostly in the form of Premarin and Prempro. That was 18 million American women. And of course, there were women worldwide being treated with hormones. And then out comes the Women's Health Initiative, and it falsely reports that there's an increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke with Prempro arm, not even the Premarin arm of the study. But it wasn't statistically significant, and they published that within the original Women's Health Initiative. But that's not what the press got a hold of, and it scared the American female public. It scared all the providers, and it got blown up so hugely that all the gynecologists, family doctors, internists, everyone that was prescribing, not to mention all of the women, got so scared that the whole treatment of women with hormones received such an enormous and incorrect body blow, and the treatment plummeted, so that even by the 2016, there was only 5 million women, because there had been some recovery, who were being treated with hormones, and over half of them were being treated with compounded bioidenticals. And then the original study committee of the Women's Health Initiative published in the original journal, the Journal of American Medical Association, that after 18 years of follow-up, indeed, there was no increase risk with breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke for women who were treated with hormones. But who's heard of that? I mean, the gynecologists haven't heard
Scary
of it.
negative headlines just get into the cultural consciousness, and it's so hard to get it out. And you know what's crazy is that in the Netherlands, in many of those countries, for example, like Finland, they see that hormones will protect their female aging citizens and not topple their health care. So they give, the minute a woman becomes menopausal, in many of these Netherlands countries, they get handed hormones for free by the government. And in fact, they've been tracking these women now for almost 20 years because they have breast cancer registries and cardiovascular disease registries. And they now know, because the government gives women the hormones, who was on what hormones for how long and who had these adverse potential events. And they've been able to show the safety, the long-term safety, and they are protecting their healthcare system by putting women on hormones and then giving it to them without them needing to go through a song and a dance with a doctor that doesn't believe in it and then still have to pay for it in many cases. That to me screams out loud. If socialized medicine acknowledges hormones will protect socialized medicine, why are we allowing so many of our women to have such a harsh time with aging? It's sad to me, very sad.
And there you use the word topple. And you and I had this discussion a while ago. And of course, I visited my mom in an assisted living facility when we could no longer take care of her at home, and then on to the nursing home. And as her cognitive decline, her sarcopenia, led to bladder incontinence, the sarcopenia, and to have a cane and then walker and then wheelchair. And you and I were talking about what percentage of American women are in assisted living facilities and nursing homes because they don't have sufficient hormones. And I think it's a huge percent, and it is capable, because those end of the life events and these expensive nursing homes and assisted living facilities are capable of toppling Medicare. And so how significant a point this is. And I love to emphasize this to women, that we all want to live strongly and vitally right up to our last day on earth. A woman who's 90 years old cares as much about her life as a 20-year-old woman does, or a 50-year-old woman. And why not be able to walk and talk and think and sit down on the floor with your great-great-grandchildren and play with them and have a good life and think clearly, and not go into an assisted living facility, bless their hearts, and nursing homes that topple the healthcare system. It's so profound.
But it's amazing. It's also with COVID, it's so timely. There's now at least 4 different clinical trials taking a look at, why does COVID strike men? Men are more vulnerable to getting it, and they're more vulnerable to fatality once and if they get it. So they've been looking at the protective action of estrogen and progesterone on the immune system. So this is a perfect time to be on hormones, not only for all the anti-aging, very clear benefits from it, but it also is protective against this virus. I'm now in day 12 of COVID. I don't know how I got COVID, but I did. And I got a very, very mild case, even though I'm in a very high risk group. Is part of the protection I had because I'm on hormones, and those hormones are immune system protective. So it's a time we don't want to deny hormones to women.
And of course, it would make sense that hormones, they're so powerful. They have such a strong effect on our metabolism, on our energy production. And it would make perfect sense that when you remove these hormones, like in menopause, there's very dire consequences of it. And we could go through the list, but we don't have to do that. And so, yeah, there's another myth that got exploded with the Women's Health Initiative, and it was, well, if you're going to go on hormones, be sure you only go on them for a short period of time and on the lowest dose. Totally opposite of what's true. You don't have to go on useful doses, but you want to get on enough to protect your vagina, your bones, your muscles, your brain, your arteries. That's not useful levels, but it is just shy of it. So you want to get that hormone replenishment right and stay on it right for the whole rest of your life, every day, because that's the healthiest thing for you.
You know, I had breast cancer. You were my breast cancer doctor. in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I think it was, I put it behind me so much that I'm not exactly sure of the years, but it has to be around 26, 27 years ago now. And of course, everybody said to me, even my functional medicine colleagues, you can never go on hormones. You can never go on hormones. You now have had breast cancer, a hormonally driven illness. You're never going to be a candidate for hormones. You're a high-risk woman. This is what all these ladies are being told, even if they just have a sister or an aunt with it. You're a high-risk woman and you are not a candidate for hormones. But when I saw what was going on, that women were being denied hormones because of a misanalysis of the Women's Health Initiative, I spent 3 years writing the book, Safe Hormones, Smart Women. In fact, when the 19-year reanalysis came out, I went back and reread my book, and it was saying everything that the 19-year was in sync. So I realized that hormones really don't drive breast cancer in the way that we think, and they also give you a quality of immune system. So I have now been on hormone replacement for something like 23, 24 years post breast cancer. I have a little ebook on my website called Hormone Replacement for Breast Cancer Survivors, because there's so much coming out on the protective action of male hormones, especially on the breast. I think of it as maleness protects femaleness, even though we're in a period of gender fluidity. I know that might not be a politically correct way to say it. There's so many problems with talking these days. But so even that, you've become colleagues and friends with Dr. Avram Blooming, who I interviewed for Safe Hormones, Smart Women. And he had a 14-year trial that took him a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get it approved by the NIH and the FDA to run this trial on breast cancer patients. And he gave breast cancer patients estrogen, albeit conjugated equine estrogen, Premarin, because he works for that company. And every year he spun off a paper. And at the end of 14 years, he did a conclusion paper showing that breast cancer patients on this estrogen had less recurrence, less death if they did have recurrence, and better quality of life. And as the fickle finger fate would have it, his wife got breast cancer while he was doing this study, and so did his daughter. And he gave them the choice if they wanted to be part of his study, and they decided to do that, and they're both still doing fine. So things are a change in terms of our understanding, but you go to your doctor and you say, do you think I'm a candidate for hormone replacement? And you hear this litany. I don't believe in hormones. They're dangerous. They cause breast cancer. And so women, I so appreciate what you're doing with your constant hard work to educate women and let them know the science, but then they also need to work with your trained doctors or doctors that understand this so they won't miss out on it. And it's hard trying to get the educated masses of the physicians to catch up with the science so women won't lose out. Thus, you have shows like this. Thank you so much, David. You're just
thank you,
passing the
Dorothy.
good info forward.
What an elegant presentation. And yes, for women who want more of the science, Dr. Blooming and his colleague, Dr. Tavris, have written this fabulous book called Estrogen Matters. Estrogen Matters. And it's by Avram Blooming, MD, and Carol Tavris, PhD. It's over my shoulder here. It's that book right there with the white binding there. And he's an oncologist, no less. And yeah, the thing to know is, and I'm just going to repeat it once more, is that women who are treated with hormones, even Premarin and Prempro, are at less risk for getting breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women who are not treated with hormones. And as you just said, women who've had breast cancer and have had the breast cancer properly treated are at less risk for recurrence if they're treated with hormones, even Premarin and Prempro, than if they are not treated with hormones. So may that stay with you. And then another thing that is so important to know, and I'm just repeating myself, is that when you go on hormones, stay on them to our last breath. I'm on
the most hormonally balanced corpse in the cemetery.
I'll stay on my hormones for the rest of the time I get to be privileged to be on Earth. And there's a question here. that I'd like to, that's come in on one of our Facebook listeners. And this is from Danielle. And she said, my doctor said that only oral estradiol is cardiovascular protective because of how it is metabolized in the liver. Wouldn't estradiol be cardiovascular protective regardless of delivery? Which one of us would like to jump in on that one?
Well, you're the moderator, so I'm going to leave it up to you.
Well, no, since this is a special day, please comment and I'll add in anything extra.
Estrogen is incredibly protective to the basic cell of the heart, the cardiomyocyte, and it doesn't matter which way you get the estrogen in. And in fact, it appears that topical or vaginal is much more protective because it stays more as an unadulterated estrogen. When you take estrogen orally, it's affected by your microbial life and your biome in your gut, and it also does what's called the first hepatic pass, so it goes through the liver. And the metabolites that are made, they're still helpful, but they can also be not helpful. They can be pro-inflammatory. They could be pro-coagulative. They could create issues. They even can bind up the protective estrogen receptor, ER beta. Yet Avram Blooming gave Premarin, an oral estrogen, to his breast cancer patients for 14 years, and they had protection. So what we've learned in the last 2 years that was really kind of a mind blower for all of us in functional medicine was that hormones are protective, and we still believe bioidentical hormones have many more downstream benefits than not. But we discovered that any hormone, even a synthetic hormone, is better than no hormone at all when you're talking about estrogen, not necessarily when you're talking about the synthetic progestins. That was a big mind blower. So orally, we think metabolites are made that aren't quite as good as the ones you put on your skin or you put on your mucous membrane, like into your vagina. But and that's not true that topical estrogen isn't heart protective. In fact, there are people that are born with genetic coagulative issues, something, for example, called factor V Leiden, and they might be much more prone to clots. But studies have shown that if they take estrogen on the skin or in the vagina, they don't get any of that procoagulative action, and they can safely take hormones, but it depends on their delivery mode, the mode that makes the least pro-clotting issues. When you take it orally, there are in some women the potential for more pro-clotting issues. So I think your doctor has it a little bit backwards, but God bless him anyway.
And I'd like to add a few things to that. Estrogen itself is also extremely protective to the coronary arteries and to arteries in general, but the coronaries are under the most pressure, so they're the most vulnerable. And what we know about young women is that it's very unusual to hear about one of them dying with a heart attack on a tennis court. But young men, it's not that uncommon. It's rare, but it's not that uncommon that you hear he was in his 40s. He died from a heart attack on the tennis court, and he had never been sick a day in his life, because what we know is the incidence of coronary vascular disease and heart attacks is much higher in young men than it is in young women, but the incidence equalizes by the age of 60. And no coincidence there. That's when the estrogen has disappeared from all women. And so estrogen is protective in whatever form that you take it. However, as you mentioned, there is a big difference between orally administered estrogen in the form of estradiol, is one of the most common ways, or Premarin or Prempro, and topically administered. The oral can promote coagulability. And there is, us humans, we have this delicate balance between not clotting too much, because we don't want to have clots in our vessels, but being able to clot in case we have a cut or a spear wound. We want to be able to clot. So there's this delicate balance. And what we know about oral estrogens is it pushes the balance towards excessive coagulability. And we knew this, we learned this very early on. In the advent of the birth control pills, there was this rare, but it definitely happened, side effect, so to speak, where a woman got thrombophlebitis. She got a blood clot and inflammation in a vein in her leg, and from taking the birth control pill. And worse than that, some of those clots in some women broke loose and went to the lungs and caused a pulmonary embolus, and some women died from that. And this was an unusual but definitely reportable complication of the birth control pill. It was from the oral estradiol. It promotes coagulability. It also promotes inflammation. And so there is a big difference between oral administered estrogen and topical administered estrogen. And there's a third point about it, and that is because of what you just mentioned, that first pass through the liver when you swallow something like a fat-soluble steroid hormone, it goes first to the liver. It doesn't go right into the bloodstream. When you apply it topically, it goes right into the bloodstream. When you swallow it, it goes first to the liver. That's why it's called first pass through the liver. And then 60% of it, 40 to 60% of that estrogen that you administered gets metabolized right away, never even makes it into the body. So in order to get proper estrogen levels in a woman to alleviate symptoms and be protective, you have to administer higher doses, as was reported by Dr. Jonathan Wright, who suggests that many of the complications from estrogen comes from oral estrogens because you have to administer between 1 and 2 milligrams, whereas he suggests that the proper amount to administer is 0.25 milligrams of estrogen. So yeah, estrogen by mouth, don't do it. Why would you in the world when you do it? When first of all, it absorbs so beautifully when you apply it to the skin or the mucous membranes. So, or estrogens by mouth, no.
You know, one of the most amazing articles I ever read was in ACOG, the journal for the official journal for gynecologists, OBGYN docs. And it came out in 2008, and it was this woman who was getting her PhD in Finland. And because Finland has socialized medicine and they give the hormones to menopausal women for free, she was able to do the study. This is how I first found out that in the Netherlands, they were giving hormones to their females that were getting older. I bumped into this study when I was writing Safe Hormone Smart Women. In this study, she tracked about 90,000, 100,000 women over 14 years. And then she checked all of the registries, the breast cancer registry, the heart disease registry. Did they have clots? Did they have a stroke? Did they have a heart attack? She meticulously did this for her PhD. I tried reaching out to her and communicating with her because her email address was on the article, but I never got any response, but it was brilliant. So in real time, she looked at almost 100,000 women, which way they were given hormones, and if they had adverse events or not. And they were able to show that if you took estrogen through a mucosal membrane vaginally, or you took estriol, which is the forgotten protective anti-cancer estrogen, there was never an increased risk of breast cancer or any adverse heart issues like a clot. And I sent this article to Dr. Wright, your friend and mine. He was my mentor when I first started on this career many, many decades ago. And he started recommending just vaginal hormones after that because the vaginal hormone delivery system was so safe. The same with the topical, but the topical, after 5 years, there were a few extra incidence cases of breast cancer. So I got struck by that myself. And being that I've had breast cancer, now I take my hormones vaginally. And, you know, there's hormone gurus out there like Roussier, who's saying the only way to take hormones is orally. Then you're saying you should take it as an oil on your skin. And then some people are saying vaginally. So to the woman out there, it's confusing. And I'd love to have you address the different delivery modes. And I just think this is an important question, because if you're going to get your hormones, you have to get it into your body in some way. That's called a delivery mode. And I love what you've done with the menopause method. You've created your own patented oil to get it in and bypass some of the artifacts that are in the regular cream. But can you address that study? Because that study is how I now guide myself to be on hormones and patients that work with me.
Well, yeah, and I'd like to segue as part of that a question that came from a woman named Summer, and
Hi, Summer.
and she said, "This is a great discussion. I went through difficult conversations with different doctors telling me I wasn't eligible for BHRT because of my DCIS. That's right. a cancer in situ, in a small cancer in the breast." My breast cancer wasn't estrogen positive. It was only progesterone positive because I was taking progestin at the time. And what I'd like to say about that is we've had personal communications with Dr. Blooming around these receptor sites. And Dr. Blooming is of the opinion that it isn't the estrogen positive or the progesterone positive receptor site parts of cancer that are the problem. They're a relatively healthy part of the tumor, but it's the part of the tumor that is the cancer part that is broken away from body control. And so he is of the opinion that this is not the problem, giving a woman estrogen when she has had a breast cancer, whether it's estrogen receptor site positive, progesterone receptor site positive, or negative. Now, there's a million moving parts to how cancer is created. And to zero in on hormones in general, like I always like to say to someone who's got a serious illness, whether it's cancer or anything, if we had a video of your whole life, you were videoed from the time you were conceived till this very day, 24/7.
So if you were a Kardashian.
And there was a magic button in the editing room where we could edit out all the good stuff, all the fun, all the love, all the happiness, all the good things you ate, and all the exercise you did. What we would leave behind are the causes of nutrition, or the causes of toxicity, the causes of how you responded biologically to the stress in your life, and the exercise you did or didn't do. We would see the causes, and there'd be thousands and thousands and thousands of them, as well as mysterious stuff. Illness goes so far beyond biochemistry and what we commonly think of. The causes of illness run silent and run deep. And to zero it in on estrogens is an error to begin with, and then read estrogen. Summer, read Estrogen Matters, because I'm challenging this information entirely, and that it's not correct information to say that you should not be treated with cancer, with progesterone or estrogen, because you have that positive receptor site.
Can I make a comment
here? Please, yes.
So I think what Avram Blooming is saying, and he's basing this on quite a number of peer review articles. It isn't just his opinion. This is based on a growing body of peer review science. It's that breast cancer is caused by cells that don't have receptors for estrogen on them. And they're called breast cancer stem cells or tumor initiating cells. They do not have estrogen receptors. And the growing understanding is that all breast cells have estrogen, progesterone, oxytocin, et cetera. They all have hormone receptors. And when you have a tumor, if it's ER positive or PR positive, it still has some of the elements of its original cell. So it's still acting somewhat like an original cell. It's not that estrogen in your bloodstream is going to nestle on into that receptor and make it grow. So this is a brand new concept. And there's also a lot of information about androgens, male hormones. Cancer is considered growth out of control. And male hormones help control growth at the breast, as well as control volume of your brain and many other things, and control your immune system and your gut wall. But male hormones help reduce excessive growth out of control in the breast. So there's a building body of data, if your doctor won't feel comfortable with estrogen, to at least start with testosterone, because there are humans, and I summarize this in a small ebook in my website called Hormones for Breast Cancer Survivors. It's the story of male hormones being protective, and how a woman who just finishes breast cancer treatment can go on this with their doctors, and it's got all the citations for you to hand to your doctor for them to feel comfortable now to write you this script. But doctors that are in the know will take now a bigger look at all the hormones, because we do not think that hormone-driven cancers are all caused by hormones themselves. In fact, the opposite, which is what the 19-year reanalysis showed us, that estrogen protects against the incidence of breast cancer. And then Avram Blooming in his book did his own 14-year study and shared about another 10 other studies at cancer centers where women with estrogen receptor positive breast cancer survivors were given either estradiol or Premarin and tracked for an average of about 7 years. There's 10 other studies other than his. And once again, the women with a history of breast cancer an estrogen-driven, supposedly, but not, it's looking like that's not the case, were given estrogen, they had less risk of getting it back again, less risk of dying from it if they did get it back again. And they felt so much better, their quality of life, versus their breast cancer survivors that are on aromatase inhibitors or tamoxifen without any estrogen or hormones added to the mix are accelerating aging at the speed of an accelerated bullet. You know, you really increase aging in these women. So one, they went through a bad disease and now they're aging at a faster rate. So is that helpful?
Of course. And would you spell out the name of that book, of your book that you wrote there, Devaki, and how people can get this?
So if you go to my website, which is drlindseyberkson.com, drlindseyberkson.com, and then in the store, I summarize this whole new understanding of estrogen in an ebook called Estrogen Vindication. And I now go around the country. I was set up until the pandemic hit to have about 20 different seminars to medical groups to explain this new understanding of estrogen right before the pandemic hit, because December 19th is when these 13 prestigious cancer societies presented this brand new understanding that estrogen protects against breast cancer. It's not causing it. And that was December 19th. So I was invited to speak at a hormone gala in Las Vegas, sponsored by PCCA, who makes many of the formulas and creams for compounding pharmacists. And we gave this huge talk on the vindication of estrogen, and then the pandemic hit. I'm lecturing in Detroit in March. They have continued to have that seminar. It's to the Integrative Complementary Medical Group, and it's all about this new understanding of estrogen. So I've summarized all that in a little book for you, an ebook called Estrogen Vindication. And then I also summarize the data for giving male hormones to breast cancer survivors that you could hand to your providers. And that book is called Hormones for Breast Cancer Survivors. And they're little ebooks that give, the one on estrogen vindication has about 200 citations. And it summarizes everything that we're saying right now.
So that's drlindseyberkson.com.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I want to address that issue of testosterone. I mean, for all of my career and all my life, I've thought of testosterone as a male hormone. And what, of course, you and I know so clearly is that testosterone is a human hormone. And every single woman that I've ever tested, certainly by 3 years after her last period, gets very low or very, very low in testosterone, way too low to support her health. And every woman, there's a lot of women these days that are getting falling testosterone below acceptable levels, even when they're in the perimenopause, because testosterone is recruited as a stress hormone, and you can wear out your ovaries' ability to keep the robust levels of testosterone that women have. Testosterone is a female hormone, and the loss of that female hormone has all kinds of very negative consequences, such as the loss of your muscles, something called sarcopenia. And I was lived in Florida for 20 years. And I tell you, when you walk the beaches, you don't see a tremendous number of elderly people walking the beaches. And when you do, you can, what stands out is about their thin thighs and their thin lower extremities. If they're not overweight, they have sarcopenia. I was told about this in medical school. And sarcopenia of the muscle that holds up the bladder and the uterus, when you get sarcopenia and loss of that muscle, you start getting urinary incontinence, especially when coupled with vaginal atrophy. So testosterone is a crucial hormone for women. And the moral of the story is, as you go into perimenopause and menopause, you want to replenish every ovarian hormone that there is. And there's 4 of them. And there's the estrogens. That's a family, really. We like to replenish biest with, it's a combination of estradiol and estradiol, and also testosterone, and also progesterone, and also DHEA. And then quite a while ago, when we were talking, you mentioned about delivery systems, and I did want to circle back to that. Because steroid hormones, almost universally, with the exception of progesterone and maybe DHEA, should not be administered by mouth. There's excessive risk and excessive dosages needed when you administer estradiol or estrogens by mouth. And testosterone should never be administered by mouth because it can be damaging to the liver, but they're beautifully absorbed topically. And the traditional way that they're dispensed by compounding pharmacies is in creams or gels. And by great coincidence, back in the same office where you and I first met, the compounding pharmacist that I was working with shipped one of my patients' hormone jars to my office rather than to the patient. I was fascinated. I'd been prescribing for 10 years and I'd never seen a hormone. And it came in one of those white cosmetic jars. I don't know if you remember them. And I opened up the lid. I wanted to look at a hormone, and this odor came out. And the odor was a concern to me. And I did some research on it, and it turns out that 99.3% of what's in the jars or the Topiclix or the syringes is actually strong solvent. These steroid hormones do not dissolve in water. And in order to administer a uniform dose, you have to get them to dissolve, or so it was thought. Well, I've been a holistic doctor by that time for 35 years, and I'm getting my patients to detoxify them and having them get rid of all their household goods that are poisonous. And meanwhile, I did the math. I'm asking them to put a quart a year of their topical bioidenticals on their skin for 30 years. I'm suggesting that they do this. And that was something wrong with that picture. And my son and I went on to invent and patent a hormone dispensing system in organic oils. These are certified organic oils. They're not a solution. You have to shake the bottle. We've tested this very thoroughly, and it's the same concentration at the beginning of the bottle as it is at the end. Suspensions work beautifully. And so we recommend that you apply these topically. And topically means skin, and topically means mucosal surfaces as well. I think the vagina is just an amazingly absorptive surface, but it's got some issues. They're so technical, I don't want to go into it. It becomes difficult to test the women because the hormones actually linger in the vagina. We did a study on this ourselves. But actually, if a woman's not having intercourse, the vagina works really well. It just gets a little difficult to do 24-hour urine hormone testing. But you can comment on that. But I'm not aware. I know.
Well, my life changed when I started taking my hormones vaginally because I just really couldn't absorb them that well through my skin. I have very thin skin, and I've been working out my whole adult life. And I don't know, when I started taking my hormones vaginally, for me, I started experiencing incredible sleep, incredible energy, it took my hormone replacement to another level. So I think it just depends on
the woman and on the skin.
But I just want to make one comment, unless I don't want to interrupt you here.
Well, yeah, here it is. It's once again, we're down to the individualization. And although we wind up doing 24-hour urine hormone tests on all of the women so that we make sure that they are absorbing it through the skin. And when they don't absorb it through the skin, we recommend mucous membranes, which is pretty unusual in our practice. But there you go. I mean, what you're pointing out is this is not a one-dose-fits-all system at all. Women are so highly individualized. And what you want to do is go to a specialist and someone who really knows what they're doing so that they can figure everything out, including what was figured out for you, or you figured it out. That you needed.
It's so hard, though, because doctors are trained to help heal. And you walk in, you see so many patients a day before telemedicine, and you're supposed to be able to tell them exactly what to do. But then doctors have totally different opinions based on their own experience, what they've read of the literature, and the patient base that's walked in their door, the issues that they've had that they've learned from. And it ends up being, so varied. If you had a heart issue and you had to have heart surgery and you asked 10 different cardiologists what kind of surgery, you might get 10 different opinions. And I think this is what makes women a little bit crazy, but it is the delivery of medicine. Medicine is the art and the science. So you end up getting the exposure of the art and the science to the physician that the universe has put you in front of them for that moment. And, oftentimes when people get into functional medicine, they're first trained in allopathic medicine until they have a patient or a family member that doesn't respond, whose life is on the line. And then this functional approach is the big aha for them. But if you go to someone without that big aha functional moment, you might get a different set of answers. So I think it's so important not to be frustrated. This is just the isness of healthcare. It's always been this way. So you have to find how lucky that you showed up today to Dr. Rosensweet, giving all of this incredible information and this dialogue. I was a hormone scholar. I was very lucky to be invited to be part of this prestigious estrogen think tank at Tulane University called the Center for Bioenvironmental Research. And I worked there off and on for about a decade. And I worked with the two scientists who discovered the first receptors of hormones. They discovered estrogen receptor 1 and estrogen receptor 2. So much of the dialogue was on receptor functionality and how you make these receptors healthy, and not even a testing, whether it's urine or blood, that doesn't tell you if the hormone makes it to the receptor and can signal the nucleus and the genes in that cell. So the real issue, talking to the guys who discovered the first two receptors, so Elwood Jensen discovered ER alpha, and Yanaki Gustafson from the Karolinska Institute discovered ER beta. So alpha is the first, beta is the second. They would say, we don't understand why doctors don't take this into account. Receptor functionality is where the rubber meets the road. So you can have a perfect 24-hour urine hormone test, or you can have a perfect blood test. But if your hormone isn't able to get to the receptor, which is where all your nutrients from a great absorbed diet go, so then you need to have zinc and vitamin A and B6 and magnesium and iodine at the receptor level. And then you have to make sure there aren't any chemicals squatting on that receptor, that you're not exposed to so many toxins that your receptors are already busy with chemicals. So we call that competitive inhibition. And I think that shows up with how a woman feels in response to, because we don't have any set tests for that at the moment. But it's always so mind-boggling to me that the two scientists who discovered receptors, and of course now breast cancer treatment are all based on Elwood Jensen. At first he was misunderstood, and then he gets the Lasker Award because making, profiling a woman's breast cancer was all based on his work now, because he said hormones speak to receptors. Before that, no one believed in receptors. But these two guys are saying that how your receptors can receive the signal of hormone is essential. And Yanaki Gustafson went out to Houston, where he got hired by a pharmaceutical company to try and come up with medications that act like testosterone at the estrogen receptor of the breast, or act like the healthy estrogen receptor, ER beta. And he's looking at herbs, and he's looking at diet, and he's looking at male hormones to act to protect the breast against cancer. And none of this is still getting down to the clinical level, because there's always this huge lag time. So I just wanted to make a comment on that, because having the honor to have worked with these guys, they say, look, at hormones are this big, 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 big picture. And it's not just perfect levels, it's function. And are your receptors able to get the hormone signal? And I just think this is an important point that's often not discussed. But
well, on my very extensive notes about what I want to talk to you about today, look at that word receptor sites. Because there's one way I'd like to address this is the treatment of women in menopause is a very, very unusual and outlying field in the world of medicine. In the 1990s, by the 1990s, almost every branch of medicine started to develop these very robust specialties. There used to be internal medicine doctors and family doctors. Then you started getting cardiologists and gastroenterologists. There was always surgeons, and then there was orthopedic surgeons. It seems like every branch of medicine developed these very rigorous specialties with their residency programs, their training programs, and their board certification. Not menopause. Menopause hit a body blow in 2002, and the whole treatment of women was just derailed entirely. And so you didn't get the specialty of dealing with these powerful biochemicals called hormones. And nowadays, when women go out there to get treatment, they're usually dealing with physicians who have these broad-based practices. Menopause and treating with hormones, these powerful biochemicals, is a very small part of their practice. They don't know what they don't know. they're not getting the level of education and residency programs and training programs, although we're changing that. That's exactly what we offer. So here's the moral of the story, women. Go out and find a specialist. Find someone who's taken this on as their life work. This is what they chose to do, is treat women in menopause. Because now I want to take us back to this question I had for you. Would you talk more about receptor sites? I want to give a little preface to it. There's a certain significant number of women who are out there scrambling with their menopause issues on social media because they can't get the answers from the physicians that they're going to. And what the issue is, there's a lot of individualization needed and a lot of challenges, and receptor sites is one of them. When you're in a clinic and you're actually meeting up with menopausal women, sometimes there's cases that are more challenging to solve. And would you take it from a different perspective, Devaki, where you meet up with a woman in menopause and you're trying to regulate her and you start smelling that there's a receptor site issue? Could you take it from that vantage point and then tell us how you diagnose that, and what you do, how you treat that, where you're suspecting there's a receptor site issue?
So hormones are powerful signaling molecules. They have to get the signal to the gene in the cell. To do that, most of the time, not all of the time, they do that by nestling on into a receptor. They dock like a parking space into that receptor. And then the receptor and the hormone literally, according to Tom Bishop, who did the first computerized computational graphic of a hormone signaling a receptor, they shimmy in space. And as long as they shimmy, estrogen signals or progesterone signals, whatever that hormone is given to the gene. And nutrients have a lot to do with how long that shimming goes on. For example, if you're deficient in B6, the shimming goes on way too long. That's why B6 insufficiency worsens estrogen dominance. So it turns out that you can also, because we live in a toxic planet and we often have a lot of toxic foods, or we're exposed to homes that outgas, we can have chemicals that sit on the receptor. So even though you have a healthy hormone, it can't get in and signal it. So the receptor functionality was a big, big topic the last few years at Tulane University, where we put on EDOT hormones were the name of the conferences. And people would come from cancer and endocrinology and environmental science programs all throughout the world and come and present their work and chat about this. And they said receptor functionality is really where it's at. And it usually means that somebody starts taking hormones replacement and doesn't get the response they should normally get. They get worse or they don't get better. And I was chatting with Dr. Wright. Dr. Wright was telling me if he gives testosterone to men and they don't respond, he puts them on a weak receptor detox program to make those receptors more available to get those signals. And I've developed a number of understanding from working at Tulane and working in hormones for so long about what helps clear off the receptors. So I actually got together with Biotics vitamin nutraceutical company. They're here in Texas, and we have a new line coming out, one to clear the receptors and the other one to give all of the nutrients that help the receptors function. They're totally focused on receptors because most doctors don't focus on receptors. And once again, if you don't get the response you're getting, you've really been trying to individualize the dose. So it's not a dosage issue, but you're not getting the response, or you're getting a worse response than you should. This is suggestive that you have some receptor issues, but they're very responsive to detox and to giving you the nutrients that help the receptors function. For example, for a hormone to dock into the parking space of a receptor, there has to be 2 ions of zinc. And in science, this is literally referred to as the zinc finger. So let's say you've taken Biest or estrogen. These 2 ions, atoms of zinc, will pull the estrogen in and help it dock into the DNA binding domain. And if you don't have enough zinc because you can't digest, or you have inflammatory bowel disease, or you eat a poor diet, or you're older and you're not absorbing your food, even your supplements is like you much were, you might not have the nutrients that help the hormone work at the receptor site. So I have this new line coming out, and I'm not even sure of the name at the moment. I think one's called Daily Receptor Site and the other one's called Daily hormone balance or something like that. But over many, many years of focusing on this, these are ways of taking this so that your receptors stay functional and available, so that when you go see a great doc like Dr. Rosensweet here, and he gives you your hormones, your receptors are ready, willing, and able to receive the beautiful signals that you're giving it. And I think this is such a huge part of hormone health, and this is not taught hardly anywhere. That's why I created a new program online called Redefining Hormones in Today's Toxic World, because so many chemicals, one of the reasons you're seeing lower and lower testosterone in women and in males and younger, it's well documented that we have a feminization of masculinity in the world. There's lots of research. I published about this in my book, Sexy Brain, where I said there's environmental castration occurring because of so many toxins. Well, many of these toxins act to sit on the receptor site that should take male signals, and the male hormones can't get in. So they're anti-androgenic pollutants. And so we live in a toxic world. So that's affecting our ability to receive the hormones that we get. And so I think this is an important point. That's why I created these products. I think they're launching in February, and we're not quite in February, like a week or two away. But I remember Jonathan saying to me, I have some men, I give them even injections of testosterone. Remember, no matter which way you get it, it's got to sit on that receptor, and they're not feeling more energy and clearer thoughts. So I put them on a 10-day detox program. And then when I give them the testosterone, then they have a positive response. So this is something to keep in mind. But remember, if you ask your doctor about this, they're probably not going to know about it. And people that are supposed to know everything, that's their job. Every patient that comes in, they're supposed to know what to do to help you out in this short little period of time. It's kind of a very maddening scenario, the way it's set up. You're supposed to be a know-it-all. So you're usually down on what you're not up on. So if someone asks you a question, do you know about receptor detox? If you don't know about it, you're usually going to poo-poo it and put it down. So just keep that into mind rather than getting frustrated. It's human nature. But at least Dr. Rosensweet goes to all this trouble with his great, amazing son, Jonathan, to constantly be educating you so you can seek out the person who does resonate with all of this, so that you can forget about your health and go on and do whatever you want to do in life with energy and dynamic. You know, I'm so old. I'm older than anybody else wherever I show up. And people are always going, what do you do? What do you do? You know, tell us every single thing you take and eat. And one of the things I do is I try and make my receptors functional so they'll receive all these beautiful hormone signals and constantly keep learning. That's why we feel safer and safer of recommending hormones even to high-risk women. Although people will yell at us because it's going to take another 20 years for this all to really settle on into most of the clinical trenches that you'll have exposure to.
Is there any other detox regimes that you recommend? Like, do you recommend saunas or skin brushing, or what kind of things would you say to our audience that they could be doing? It's going to do them good for sure, and it's going to help them in menopause respond to the hormones that they have. Anything you'd suggest there?
Boy, there's so many things that you can do. And it isn't just for menopause. Before you get pregnant, you really want to clean out your receptors and your hormones before you get pregnant, because these endocrine disrupting compounds store in fat, and the egg and the sperm are fat, the placenta has fat. And we now think that our increase in many childhood illnesses and even our increase in infertility are due to pollutants that are sticking in the fat and not letting your hormones signal the way that they should. So we live in a dirty planet, so some kind of daily detox should be part of everybody's life now. There's many detoxes, and you can do many. I write about one in Sexy Brain. I have a 10-day detox in there, but any type of detox, many people do detoxes, but you should do something every day besides these separate detoxes for whatever person you want to follow, guide you through. So there are some basic things daily you can do. First of all, you want to keep getting exposed to more and more endocrine potentially disrupting pollutants. So you want to take your shoes off at the front door. If you've got garage, a big source is attached garages. So leave the door of your garage up for a few feet. I summarize all of this in Hormone Deception, which was one of the first breakthrough books on endocrine disruption. And based on that book, I was invited to be a scholar at the Center for Bioenvironmental Research. So hormone deception summarizes all this, goes through your office, your supermarket cart, your home, and shows you how to decrease exposure. That's one thing. And then you need to do some things that are constantly nudging out these chemicals that can be affecting your receptor functionality. So one of the things is heavy exercise. Exercise liberates fat cells to reduce a little bit of the stored pollutants, and it helps clear it out if you drink a lot of water while you're exercising. And we even recommend taking a very, very low dose of niacin before you exercise. This seems to open up fat cells even a little bit better while you exercise. But one of the benefits of regular exercise, to the point where you sweat, that's why saunas help. That's why steam helps. Anything that makes you sweat starts to break open or lyse fat cells where you store these potentially receptor damaging chemicals. So, and there are also herbs. Cilantro is quite an extraordinary herb where it helps claw out these stored receptor adverse functioning pollutants. And so I try and go through a jar of dried organic cilantro herb on my salads, on my food every single month. That's something that's very, very effective. And there's also nutrients that you can take, and you can be tested. Right when I had breast cancer, Alan Gaby is a colleague of you and myself. He's considered one of the major fathers of nutritional medicine. But he and I were starting out together in the 70s. And we've been like brother and sister for many years. Jonathan fixed us up on a date, and we weren't date material, but we became brother sister material. And when I got breast cancer, he sent me a card, and he drew 2 huge breasts, and he said, "I love these. Let's go detox together." So he invited me to come sleep on his couch while we went and drove every day to Walter Crinion, who passed away this last year and is considered one of the fathers of environmental medicine. And Alan and I did the whole Walter's very famous detox protocol, where he tested our fat cells prior to doing the protocol for all these different kinds of chemicals, from DDT to dioxin. And here I was eating organically for the last several decades, a yoga teacher, a meditator, and my body was filled with chemicals from being in the era when they used a lot of chemicals and being a DES daughter. So we did 3 hours of sauna a day, we did herbs, we did exercise, and then Walter and we did colonics, and we even tested the effluent of the colonics, and all the chemicals that were in our fat cells were coming out in the colonics. So then Walter retested us. I did this for 6 weeks. Alan did it for 2 weeks. And then he retested us a year later. And by a year later, because when you do an in-depth detox, you continue to detox for weeks and months afterwards. So there's short-term detox, daily detox, in-depth detox. And by the end of the year, none of the chemicals that I had tested positive before I embarked on this were there. And I think that had a lot to do with me keeping breast cancer at bay all these years because of that in-depth detox. So some kind of daily detox, some kind of you can do a weekend detox, a week detox, and every now and then you can do an in-depth big detox. But it'd be great if there were detox centers or doctors could run your toxic levels and then track you to see if you really got the benefit. But that's a whole nother level of environmental medicine that's not practiced on a very typical basis. And here we lost Dr. Crinion.
Oh my God. What I'm sorry to interrupt you there. That's a very personal experience you had to lose Dr. Crinion, a giant in the world of detox.
So I think you have to figure out, what do you do every day that you're not getting more exposure? I had Dr. Joe Pizzarno on my show when he was just published his book on toxins. And he said he and his wife were trying to have a plastic-free home. It's easier said than done to get mayonnaise and ketchup and, salad dressings or olive oil all in glass instead of plastic. But there are steps. And in my book, Hormone Deception, I go through these steps and make it as easy as you can. So I think if you do one thing a week to lower your exposure, and you also do one thing every day, whether it's exercise or take some niacin or take some cilantro, and then you look every now and then, you do a little bit of a more in depth. You can do a 2-day detox, a week detox. You can go somewhere where someone organizes detox for several weeks and do that. So there's this whole scale of potential detoxes from daily to more in depth.
And I'd like to just bridge this a bit. I mean, cancer seems so mysterious in ways, and yet it has causes. And when you subject cells to toxic materials, the cells try and adapt. They try and change, and they'll mutate to change to get away from the poison. And breast cells, well, there's two types of major cells in a breast. There's a lot of adipose tissue, a lot of fat cells. And fat cells are reservoirs for fat-soluble chemicals. And all these herbicides and pesticides and household cleansers and the toxic chemicals that are out there, they're all fat-soluble. So the breasts become a reservoir for these toxic chemicals. And what's happening? They're sitting right next to these breast glandular cells that replicate once a month. They have mitosis. They have cell division going on, and you got a poison sitting right next. So it's not just a theory to detoxify. We want to take this one to heart as Dr. Berkson has. And oh my God, our time is up. And we left out obesity and libido and a couple other weight gain. And
oh gosh, weight gain is such a big issue for everybody too. We'll have to do another show.
Well, we love that, and I know our audience would love that. And gee, Devaki,
really, what's the feedback? Have you been getting any little comments?
Well, I haven't been reading the stream, but there's been some incredible information. Thank you for being with me today. There was a couple others that I saw go by. This is coming from Danielle. This is there's a lot of comments here, and so would we love to have you back? You name it, we'd love to have you back. My God, I knew this was exactly how it was going to go. Take off like a rocket ship, and here we go.
You're so wonderful, David. You're such a look at what a light you are. You know, the reason we want to have health is so we could be a light, and whatever that is for our life. And you are somebody, you're lit up, you know, you're lit up, and you walk your talk. And if I'm going to listen to anybody these days, because there's so many different people with so many different opinions and so many, it's mind-boggling for even the experts. So I think if you want to have some heroes, I think these heroes should be lit up. I think they should be walking their talk so that you could see they're healthy, they're shiny, they're doing the deal. I don't really like to hear a discussion on obesity or a discussion on hormone health from people who are worn out and really out of shape. So I appreciate you on so many levels, because here you are you're so functional. You have this great business with your son. What a gift that is, to be working with your family and living with your family. And you're going to all this trouble to constantly educate doctors and women, and you're lit up. You're a win-win-win as far as I'm concerned.
You feel like revealing what your age is?
Okay, I just turned
70. You don't have to. You don't have
well,
to.
You know, I lie on these dating sites, so I've created a monster. I just turned 72. So I had to get my COVID test. So I can't go back and work at the medical clinic, according to my boss, till I test negative, even though the CDC says if you have a mild case, you can go back 10 days after your symptoms go away. So I went and got my COVID test, my repeat COVID test yesterday, and she had to look at my driver's license. So this woman came out and she's all masked up and everything. And underneath the mask, she goes, "Girl, I want to know what you're doing. I mean, you do not look like that driver's license, your skin, your energy, your this, your that." We started laughing our heads off. She said, "I'm sure you don't have COVID." I'm sure, of course, I got the results back. I was still COVID positive. But the proof is in the pudding. And we should now be able to live our 70s, 80s, and 90s. One of my colleagues' mom is 100 years old, and he sent me a picture the other day, Stephen Feig, of his mom at 100, and underneath he wrote, "Hormones," because his mother is still lit up.
Yeah. And for those of you who would like to see Dr. Berkson back, please send me an email so I can pass them on to Dr. Berkson, to drr@menopausemethod.com. We want her back. Devaki, thank you so much. Thank you so much. What an honor and a privilege and fun to go down the road we went to today. So
Blessings.
yeah.
Now you're going to have to edit out my age because otherwise I'm going to get hate mail on these dating sites.
Oh my God, I didn't even know.
This is the problem, if you stay on hormones so that you have the energy that you had when you were in your 20s, but now you've got some rupees in the bank and you're a more differentiated person. You're older, but you're not older. You're younger, older. This is a new version of humanity, younger, older. But then, we have to get away from the bias against these numbers because they're not fair if you've been eating, living, walking, talking, hormoning, and you're in harmony, so that at this age, you still operate from north to south with full-on engaged interaction with the world. And
North
nobody
to
thinks
south.
that. They think you're
North to
just
south, eh?
north to south.
south.
I mean, some people think if you're in your 60s, you can't even be having sex anymore, but you could be having phenomenal intimacy for years to come. But you have to have been someone that's honored this bodysuit and eaten well and exercised well and kept your hormones in balance and try and keep a sense of universal humor because life is so challenging. But we're creating a new species where we're younger, longer.
Yeah,
Younger,
by
longer. Not
replenishing.
COVID longer, but younger, longer.
Yeah. So I'm going to sign us off for today. I know we could
Okay.
go on, and
Sorry about that.
I sure hope we have a chance to do this again, Devaki. So what a privilege, what a special privilege today to be able to do this with you. And
Okay,
so
everyone. Blessings.
until next time,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye, everybody.